for joining us today for our second episode of Get Real with Dialogue. It's wonderful to see that we have such a wonderful combined audience of brands, creators, and agencies that are joining our conversation today. And we're really mindful of your time being so precious. So thank you for joining us at what could possibly be your lunch hour. Our aim is to really keep it short, sharp, and punchy, so that even if you have to drop off after 45 minutes, we hope that you'll be able to get some bite-sized nuggets of information or insights or some best practice that you can hopefully utilize or consider in your next campaign or your conversation with your creators or your agency or just within your marketing team. And then towards the end of our last 15 minutes, we're going to be taking some questions and answers. So if questions come to you as we're chatting, please pop them in the chat and we will try and circle back and address those at a later stage so we can have a further discussion, which is the most important part. But first off, let me just sort of jump in by sort of thinking about why we came up with the topic of this content creator economy. It actually was sparked when Dialogue attended the Creative Circle Cannes feedback session that is hosted every year by BizCom with Anne Newrock. She's the Creative Circle trend analyst who gets sent every year to Cannes. And we were sitting in the audience and she was doing sort of the debrief to about, 500 of the audience strong attendees. And what she said around the content creator economy being one of the top 3 dominant trends with an unstoppable momentum had come out of Cannes, it just really sort of resonated with us in terms of what that must have meant given all the conversations that were happening at Cannes this year. And I think what really stood out was what she was saying is that wherever she went, the content creative economy was being discussed. So it's relevant to say that the content creative economy is no longer now on the fringes anymore, but it's firmly at the center of marketing conversations, which is why we wanted to have this conversation today. If you look at it through a local South African context, I think the numbers also tell a similar story. If I just did a quick little sort of analysis on South African numbers, because US is one thing, but South African is completely another. In 2024, the influencer ad spend was around roughly 502 million. This year, we're at September, year on year, it's 560 million, which is an 11% growth. And it's forecast that by 2029, it's going to have grown even more with sort of doubling the media spend. So that's, talking numbers. I think also talking brand sentiment in terms of some of the biggest global brands and what they're saying about the content creator economy. I think who said it best was actually the CEO of Unilever, who said that 50% of Unilever's media spend is now going to creators, and influencer use has surged by 800% since 2023. So when the CEO of Unilever says something like that, people definitely do sit up and take notice. And so why is the content creator economy resonating so strongly? And I think it was Anastasia Leng from Creative X who said it's because they talk to us like humans. Another quote came from Sophia Hernandez of TikTok, who said, in a world where half of the people say they don't like ads, creator content is vital. So I think who best to help us navigate this new economy in my guest today, Gill Attwood. Gill, just to give a little bit of a sort of an intro, was one of the founding members of the IAB South Africa Influencer Marketing Committee, which she hosted and facilitated for 3 years. She's also a guest lecturer at the Red and Yellow School, whilst also running as a full-time job, the Gillstrawberry Influencer School. She's worked in this space for over 20 years, and she's managed a combination of brand ambassadors, done deal negotiations, she's managed the creative, she's managed the media with some of South Africa's top personalities. So welcome, Gill, and thank you for making the time for us today.
Thanks, Trace. Thanks for having me. It's such an important conversation that we're going to have because just in the last week or so, and I know you and I have attended a lot of conferences, there's a very big disconnect between what the creator is expecting from the brand or almost demanding from the brand and what the brand is expecting back from the creator. So those things don't seem to be matching up at the moment. There seems to be a little bit of a backward slide. So this is a very important conversation.
100%. And I think let's start by talking about like the relationships, because there's sometimes a love-hate relationship between brand, agency, and content creator, right? And we all want these relationships to work. We all want to be able to deliver hugely successful campaigns that deliver on sort of brand objectives. But sometimes those relationships are not kind of, I think, cemented from the get-go. What gets in the way of that? And how can agencies and clients together with content creators, build authentic and impactful collaborations? Like what should that process look like in a perfect world?
Sure. It's with the creator at the moment, it's always going to be a cash conversation. We're gonna talk a lot about the value that influencers bring to a campaign. I found a lot of the time at the moment, creators are almost slapped on at the back, sort of they're an add-on, and there is no real influencer strategy from the start, which is supported by possibly other traditional media avenues. It's always the other way around. So we're going to have to sort of really come together with these partnerships. And I think a lot of the thing is about a disconnect of understanding and education, especially, running my influencer school. I'm actually a commercial brand manager. So I'll manage the partnership between the creator and the brand. So if you want to put one of my creators into your shoes, I'll broker that deal. I'll make sure that the contract is airtight. I will make sure that the duration has a start and an end date and it doesn't go on forever. So we're going to have to find the sort of the middle meeting point where understanding what the brand actually needs versus what the creator is willing to give.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. No,
sure.
sorry.
And then, so you're talking from a brand perspective. So are you saying that like the real starting point would then be for there to be a rock solid influencer strategy and campaign strategy for the influencer to then work off?
Yes, but I'm also saying that the agency needs to consider that an influencer-led strategy would probably it doesn't look the same as a traditional strategy. An influencer-led strategy would take into consideration the actual audience that the influencers reach, etc. At the moment, we're just looking at, how many followers do they have? What niche are they in? Okay, cool, we're good to go. And they're being popped on at the back end of a campaign saying, okay, well, we need some ticket sales, so let's get a whole bunch of influencers to post about this event or something. So it needs to bring the creator, and I mean, everyone says this all the time, but bring the creator to the table at concept stage, and have them sort of offer their insight into their actual audience and how the audience are picking up their content and what people are listening to at the moment.
So that begs my next question. So if we've talked about brands, what does a creator need from a brand? Is it creative freedom? Is it fair pay? Or is it something else completely different?
I think well, obviously creative freedom is a big one. But I think I mean, we always have this argument about, do the agencies say the budget up front, or do they sort of say, hey, this is the deliverables, this is what we want to do? Do they sell a campaign idea to the influencer first, and then off the back of that, then say, okay, well, this is our budget for that. When the creators already thought, okay, well, cool, I can do reels, I can do stories, I can do everything, but then your budget doesn't actually cover what that is. So I think what the creators actually need is a solid brief. What is the objective of the campaign? And they need to know what money they have to spend, because I don't think people realize how much a piece of content actually costs to create these days. And especially with the agency expectation, or not the agency expectation, I would say the brand expectation. I find a lot of them are expecting almost infomercials, sort of television produced quality stuff, but that involves a lot of costs on the creator side as well that I don't think people take into consideration. So I think right up front, the creator needs to know what the budget is. Then they know, okay, I can be honest with this person. I'm not going to be able to produce professional high-end quality with a videographer. It will be more self-shot off my iPhone, reel to reel, just talking from my sort of lounge couch. Is that okay with the brand? Is that what they were expecting? Because that is what they can afford. So as an agency, how do you manage the expectation of the brand when they come to you with a budget and they have an idea in their head on what they want, but the budget doesn't quite cover what the influencer costs?
Sure. So I think what's worked really well for us, having done, been working with brands and influencers probably for the last 8 years, and we've learned it the hard way. We've gone through quite a lot of teething problems to get where we are now. But I think where we are currently is that what we've identified is often there's not enough discussion and upfront work done on, why are we doing this campaign? What do we want to achieve? What are the campaign objectives? What are the KPIs? Because there's a natural resistance from brands to work with influencers because it's seen as the Wild West. Influencers can go off and they can do whatever they like with your brand. And once it's out there, you can't take it back. So there's a natural sense of discomfort when the topic of influencers come up. And I think where we work really hard in safeguarding that feeling between brands and influencers, that we spend the most amount of time on interrogating the strategy, the campaign concept idea for the campaign, and then putting all of that down in a brief. Because to your point that you made earlier, Jill, the tighter the brief, the more creative freedom it actually gives the influencer or the content creator. Because I think the biggest rub between a brand and an influencer is that you give a loose brief because you want, something creative that's authentic and speaks to the audience in a real natural way, which is why we do, influencer campaigns in the first place. Then the influencer shoots the content, comes back for approval, and it's like, oh no, but you can't say that, you can't do this, etc. And that's the rub, because then, the cost, as you're saying, is about a reshoot to do a piece of content, which it's now costing them money. It's not part of what. So it just becomes, that's where the real rub starts to happen. So I think for us, to answer your question, what we work really hard at making sure that brief is so tight that there's no misinterpretation from the brand to the influencer or from the influencer to the brand. They know exactly what they can and can't say. We've got reference shots, we've got guardrails, we've got do's and don'ts, not to kind of put them in a box in terms of what they can and can't do. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's more to give them that creative freedom that they know that what they're going to be delivering as their first drop should be approved first time round, because the two have, worked together so closely. Because often I think it's also hard for a client to try and perceive what they're looking for, because you're giving it to an influencer, it can come back in, same brief can come back in 6 or should come back in 6 different ways from 6 different influencers with their signature on it. And often they don't know what they want until they see it the first time. So it's also about managing that understanding as well. So that's just what we've done on our side, to try and bridge the gap between those two parties.
Awesome. That's awesome, because the one thing that I get my creators to do is, once we receive that brief, which we hope is comprehensive, we actually come back with a bit of a storyboard or a script. And we say, okay, opening shot, X, Y, and Z. I mean, it doesn't take us a lot of time to put that down, bring the concept to the forefront and actually get that signed off. What you said earlier, the reshoot is the swear word in our industry. It's cost a lot of money, but it also means that the creator has now lost the love for the client. And the reshoot will then just be something literally like an infomercial, where they'll read point by point whatever they've been told they need to include in the brief. And then, of course, we've lost the magic of what an influencer campaign even is. So the brief, yes, 100% is what the advertising agency or the middleman needs to get right between the expectation of their client. Then, of course, understand what the budget is they have to spend, and realistically brief the creator based on what the budget is, knowing that the creator will incur costs. I was lecturing at Red and Yellow last week, and the class was absolutely gobsmacked when I told them that you can't just shoot a piece of content anywhere. You can't go down onto the beach and shoot a piece of content. You actually need permission from the council. Then you'll get a high luxury brand that is using a creator that does speak to beauty, but that creator lives in a 1-bedroom little flat with her brother. So she needs a bigger bathroom with natural lighting, etc. So I find that my creators are actually booking Airbnbs to go use that for the day. Then add on the videographer, the hair and makeup, all of that kind of stuff. We're getting into territory that's television quality. So it's the expectation between brand's budget, brand's expectation versus what you have to spend, and then briefing the creator properly on on what you have to spend and avoiding that reshoot, because obviously that's an extra cost.
I think they also should, my thoughts on that would be that there is a responsibility for all the parties, so that, agency interrogates client to the nth degree, so that client has a solid sense of comfort that everything that they know and want from the campaign has been, transferred over to the agency. Then we can put together that brief. But I think it's also then up to the influencer, when that brief lands, for them to interrogate it, because it is their bread and butter. And if they don't ask the questions from the agency up front, and they do go, shooting a piece of content, which then comes back, and it's unfortunately that, the agency's responsibility to give feedback and ask for changes before we feel comfortable that it is now ready to go back to the client, because we're trying to be the buffer between both, right? So how often in your experience does the content creator or the info actually ask questions on the brief, in terms of, well, how many channels, is it a reel, is it a post, is it, are their usage right, how long is it going to run, where is it going to run, is it only on social, or is it on, in other mediums? Like, is that a conversation that they're open to having?
I'm actually having a bit of a giggle, because I was up until about like 9 o'clock going through contracts from agencies based on what was sort of commissioned up front and what is now in the contract. Is completely mismatched, and now I've got to go back with usage fees. The concept is, well, if this influencer's idea or theme wins, then that influencer will perform or do something, like have a lunch with the competition winner or whatever. But they haven't thought, okay, well, what about that influencer's time? That influencer's not just going to go and have lunch with somebody. You're going to have to pay them for an appearance, so at least, for that sort of time as well. So I was having a bit of a giggle. Sorry, I've actually forgotten your question. But you were saying, how often do the creator actually interrogate the brief? Not often, but with my guys, and I think one of the biggest things I tell my guys always is that, obviously, as their commercial agent, I ask the questions, but when I'm teaching at Influencer School and I'm not actually their manager, I say, the first question you must ask the agency or the brand is, have you been to my platform? Have you seen my content? Do you like my style? Because that's how I deliver my content, and that's how I speak to my audience. A lot of the time, I found that agencies are very boardroom bound, and they will have a look at the stats, and they'll go, okay, well, following tick, engagement rate tick, niche tick. But then, especially with the gamers, you have to, if you don't go to the platform, you won't realize that while those gamers are streaming, they are dropping F-bombs like it is nobody's business. They are rip his arm off and like tear his eyes out. And, so everything's lined up statistically in the boardroom that this person speaks to your audience, but you haven't actually gone to the platform to look at how does that person execute their conversation and their communication with their community, and possibly the realness of them is why they're so popular. But brands, so it goes two ways. The brands actually have to.
Yeah, and I think that is the responsibility of the agency to make that selection process really, really tight, so that so when the agency goes and is starting to sort of research the relevant influencers for that campaign, they know exactly from the client what they're looking for, who is the audience, where are they located, what is the demographic, what is the the gender split, etc. And then as part of the feedback to clients, they have all of those different criteria in terms of resonance, competitors, when last did they work on a competing brand, how long ago, etc. So but I think the more we have these robust conversations before we click play on the campaign start, the better it is for all three parties to kind of reduce that sort of rub. I'm going to stop us quickly now, Jill, because I think we're almost halfway through, and I just would like to suggest that we run a little poll for the audience that have joined. If I would ask the brand managers that are on the call to maybe answer the question, what worries you most about working with influencers or content creators? If you can think about that question, what worries you the most or makes you nervous? You can just pop your answer in the poll. And for all the creators or the influencers that have joined us on the call, I would say the question to you is, what frustrates you most about working with brands? So let's flip it and ask the audience to come up with that, and then we can circle back later and have those conversations. Okay, So you have mentioned cash a couple of times, Jill, when it comes to budget, and that budget is another component of the sort of the rub between all. And I think it's really hard for a client to sometimes to perceive the process that an influencer goes through. And I think, as you've said, long are the days where it used to be shot on a mobile phone, although it is still in to give it that real, it is still the case. But there are quite big productions that go on behind the scenes with teams of people that are required to shoot something, depending on how big that influencer is and the size of their community. Talk to us about what is realistic for a content creator or for a brand to consider when allocating a budget to an influencer campaign. And I know that's a really big question because it's like everyone is different, right? But in terms of maybe talk about turnaround time or approval process, or like some of those little sort of housekeeping elements to working with a campaign that may have 6 to 10 influencers on it.
Great question, and I get this a lot. And I also get a lot of wide-eyed people when I mention what some of my creators charge. And as you mentioned, some are quite big productions behind the scenes. I've got one creator who she's incredibly proud of her appearance, so she will not show up without a full face beat and her hair done and her outfit is impeccable. So she will always charge more than somebody who reaches the same audience, speaks to maybe the same people, but is happy to show up in in their dressing gown and shower cap. I don't know. So it really does go creator to creator, and like you say, there's a lot of things that can that influence cost. But I think from the beginning, you need to kind of have a base price or cost from the media buy perspective. So if you're looking at engagement and you're looking at following, or we don't really look at following anymore, we look at average number of views that the actual content gets. If you look at that and you think, okay, per 10,000, I'm going to allocate about 2,500 to this creator as a base rate. So if they've got, of course, 40,000 followers, that's 2,500 times 4. Then you think, okay, have they just released a new album, or are they do they have a Netflix special, or we just win the World Cup? You've got to think about all those kind of things. How relevant are they at the moment? How in demand are they at the moment? And add a little bit more of a premium on each time until you get to a point where, and I think when you work with influencers a lot, you almost get a kind of snapshot of, okay, I know that I can't go to see a Khaleesi with less than 1 million. You know what I mean? However, sort of the mid-tier guys who are sort of working just as content creators. And remember, we're talking about two different things as well, which we don't have time to get into. There's the content creator, and then there's the influencer, which is broken down into celebrities, social media influencers, how big they are, etc. So they all form part of the creator economy. Even experts like a dermatologist can charge more than a beauty blogger, because they've got an academic behind their opinion rather than just an opinion. So it really is how long is a piece of string. And I think it's really important as well for the brand to understand who and how and what and why are we going to use this influencer, and have quite a single-minded KPI or objective when they're using the influencer, because then you can make the choice based firstly on your budget and on what type of influencer you need to get that message across.
Right. And then what is your view on, let's say, there is a brand using influencers for a 6-month campaign. Is there value in, let's say I've used 10 influencers in those 6 months. Is there value in concluding that campaign, and the stats have been amazing and it's achieved everything that we set out for it to do, and then looking for another 10 influencers after that to do another 6-month campaign? Or in your experience, is there merit in maintaining the relationships with those 10 and, conceptualizing a new type of campaign and kind of creating a relationship between those influencers and or content creators for more of a longer term relationship? Which one in your view works better?
Okay, so again, depends what type of product we're using, but let's say it's skincare. It makes sense that if you're working with an influencer for 6 months, they've been using your skincare regime to stop that and now start with a whole new, set of influencers. doesn't really make sense. So what's wonderful about influencer marketing as well is that it is so dynamic. You can actually make these decisions on the go. So if you're 3 weeks or 3 months into it, you will have a very good idea of what's working and what's not working. You can even stop it before the time, and obviously you'll have contracted upfront, but I think it's about monitoring sentiment from the audience, from that influencer, and what's actually coming in. If it's positive and they're doing a good job, it doesn't make sense to find another one to replace them, for a whole new different set of campaign.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, I think what could also be a benefit to maintaining relationships long term is that it builds trust and credibility between the brand and the influencer, and then within their audience. There's almost that natural transference, because they trust that influencer, that they so too then trust the brand if there's a long-term partnership that then starts to evolve from that as well.
For sure. I mean, brand ambassadorships definitely do work better than jumping in and out of campaigns, but then, like I say, we're talking about different things. There's content creators who are mostly used on campaigns, and then brand ambassadors are usually your higher level celebrities and sports people, etc. Yes, and then it definitely makes sense to have a long-term relationship with them. It doesn't make sense for them to be wearing Adidas one week and Nike the next week.
Jill, talk to me a little bit about usage rights. You mentioned it briefly earlier. I mean, that's coming up for us now as more and more brands turn to, content creators and influencers to form part of their, their long-term strategy, where they're actually, because of the success that they're seeing, they actually want to use that content further than just being seen in the content or the influencers channel. Like, how does that work? How does that negotiation work between brands and influencers?
So it used to, before Instagram brought the collaboration function, the brand would have to say, can you please send me the file and I want to upload it on my Instagram as well. And we used to charge a premium for that. And I've had to kind of take that away, because it's now almost a platform functionality that if you don't collaborate with the brand, it doesn't make sense. So we've sort of stripped away that premium. As far as usage is concerned, I very much work on a start and end date of a contract. There has to be an end date of the contract. And once that end date has come about, then we renew the contract or we talk about new things. But after that, I don't want to see my influencer's face coming up as a throwback to what we did last year. But that we've moved on long ago and we're working with one of your competitors. So you can't be using that content that we delivered, within that campaign period. And we've gone over the exclusivity bar, and now we're seeing our face crop up. And it's happened before, where there was one clothing brand who just rehashed the photos from last year and had two back-to-back kind of posters of the same influencer in different outfits. So I think that's another thing, is that people don't realize that influencers aren't models. You can't just use that content. You can't also then take that influencer's image and put it in a press release without paying the influencer, the usage for their image in whatever press now gets generated from the campaign association. You've got to think about everything where the influencer is going to be showing up. And I need to make sure that, this is where PR companies and I start to box a little bit, because they go, okay, well, we used Mo Flavor in this advert. Now we just want to send out a press release to everybody to say that, X, Y, and Z cereal brand has partnered with Mo Flavor, and then they send that press release out, and the press can pick up whatever image of Mo that's on the internet and use it freely. But we haven't agreed to go into press or to further endorse your product across the PR channels. So that's where things get really muddy.
So how would we mitigate that? Because obviously we want to prevent that from happening, speaking for all agency owners. And I also think, like, on the flip side of that, often when you're going into a campaign at the start, you don't know how well one influencer is going to do above another. And so obviously you're monitoring the success metrics of the response that his audience is having to the campaign content. And it's only then when you're in it, you can say, okay, this is working really well. We need to up this. We need to work more with this influencer, and maybe 2 or 3 of the other influencers that are not having the same positive ones, we can actually dial those down. Because as you were saying earlier, it's quite organic. Once the campaign is live, that's the beauty of it. You can dial it up and dial it down as it's working or not working. But if it is working well, maybe to your point, there's a space where there should be another meeting between brand agency and said successful influencer to say, okay, well, this is where we're at. This is what's happening. Can we, renegotiate and add in these additional elements that you can then, work on or price or, include, so that there isn't like a rude shock at the end, because it's now, oh, well, now I'm going to charge you a fortune because you've gone and done A, B, and C without my permission.
So great question. And this is the, I suppose, what you were talking about earlier, where brands get nervous about working with influencers, is what happens is that I very much look at the partnership, and if you're not talking to your influencer throughout the campaign, then you're definitely missing a trick. You should be saying, wow, that worked really well. Hey, that reel is performing out of its boots. We'd love to be able to actually give that reel to our other influencers to run on their platforms. Can we do that, or will there be a usage? And obviously, most of the time there will be a usage, but it depends. Like if I'm in a campaign with you for over 1 million, and I'm feeling looked after, and I'm feeling, the love from the brand, a lot of the time we give away tons of added value, just saying, yeah, no, you know what, just go for it, or just, yeah, pop it on, or do it. But I think it's definitely, and like you're saying, we're not dealing with like billboards here. We're dealing with real people. So if you're paying the value and the creators feeling the love, you can go a lot further. And it is that conversation of saying, hey, we'd love to run a press release. Would you mind if we use an image with you, or must we leave an image off and just mention your name, because that's free game? Yeah, I think it's definitely, like I say, it's case by case. And like I say, you've got to be talking to your influencer all the time, especially if it's a higher level person. One thing, just my one point on that, is that I work with a lot of radio DJs. And people will say, well, can they just do a voiceover? And why are they charging so much for the voiceover? Because a normal voiceover costs 1,000 Rand. And I'm saying, well, because their voice comes with their personal endorsement, because it's recognizable. You'll know that that's Mo Flavour saying those words on another radio station or on television. So it's you've got to just keep, I suppose, in contact and enjoy the dynamic, energy that comes with running an influencer campaign, where we had no idea that this would pop off, and it's going so well. Let's change the entire strategy down this route. I think, and that's where, brands do get nervous. So like that, from your side, from an agency side, how do you help brands to let go a little bit of that control? When you see the magic happening, and you and the creator are on board, but the brand is feeling like they still want to stay the course, etc. How do you handle that?
No, I think it comes back to what we were talking originally around just having a tight brief. Because if the brief is tight enough from the get-go, brand has done everything that they need to do up front, and it just gives then the influencer that sort of creative freedom to be able to, it's like you give a toddler boundaries, and they feel safe and secure in those boundaries to be their free little spirits. You need to have those boundaries from the get-go, from the brand side to the influencer, and that's when the magic happens. I think it's when there isn't enough of a clear understanding around what both parties want that things tend to kind of fall apart.
Exactly. And I think that goes right back to the beginning of the disconnect we were talking about between brand and creator. And yes, the creative freedom. However, just like you don't know how you're going to make a hit single, you don't know how the song is going to perform. Some people think this is going to be a smash hit and then it tanks. You've got to let go a little bit of that control and trust the process. And like you say, as long as you've got all the brief things, the do's and don'ts, let it roll. And
so the irony is that at the end of the day, the brand wants are working with influencers because they want the authenticity, they want the creativity, they want the humor, they want, and so does the influencer. They want to stay true to their own voice. And so the only way to get there is for the thing to happen in the middle.
Okay. I think we've hit on quite a lot of the sort of deeper conflicts that actually come up within the campaigns, without thinking too much about the money and the cash. What do you think of this current situation where one influencer is calling out a brand publicly because of they feeling like they've been undervalued, and now they're saying, sort of saying, well, this was what we agreed upon, et cetera, and they're bringing the brand's name down. That's where the contracting becomes quite important. And also from a PR perspective, what about reputation management?
So the question is, if an influencer goes onto their social media channel and calls out the brand that they were working on.
Yeah.
Okay, then I would say that there's a gross error in how the agency is handling that influencer, because it should never, ever get to that stage, because that agency should be on the call nurturing that relationship from the minute the campaign goes live all the way through. So it should never get there, because the only reason that they're doing that is because they don't feel heard, or that the concerns or the frustrations that they're experiencing are being handled by the agency and directed through to the client for feedback. So I can't answer the question because it's never happened to us before. But again, it is about having those conversations together before anyone feels the need to take it outside of that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've also never had that problem before, because we will always address it privately before it gets out of control. But it does happen a lot when you're using those platforms that sort of recruit influencers en masse, and there's almost like a product drop, that's just basically shipped off, and it's a spray and pray type of strategy, which we haven't really spoken about now. I mean, I think what you and I also haven't spoken about, but there's no ways we can cover all the bases, is the difference between a content creator and an actual influencer. When do we actually cross over? And for me, I mean, obviously content creators can become social media influencers, but until you are influential in your niche and you're becoming a household name, you're going to stay a content creator. And the way we deal with content creators, especially budget-wise, is different to how we handle influencers. So we are talking about a very dynamic topic with the creator economy, because like I said, we're also talking about professionals, professors, experts in their field, dermatologists, doctors. The payment terms, etc., are different. So this is one of those topics that we could debate forever. I love that comment, Jill, because I think there is a place for both, and more so now we're actually looking for content creators that are in really niche audiences, where we're trying to sort of insert sort of a brand message or into an audience, so to get into the hearts and minds of audiences that are in really niche or fragmented sectors of certain communities, where we don't look for an influencer, we look for an expert or a key opinion leader, or as you said, like a specialist who has got the credibility and the trust of having that degree behind them, or the designation that they've got, a voice of authority, in other words, because sometimes that is as valuable in terms of trust and credibility to build between a brand and the audience than it is to have an influencer who sits on a very big, that's reach, that's storytelling and so on. But it's case by case what the client is looking for in terms of, do you use a content creator or do you use an influencer? I think they're very different in terms of how you would select that. Yeah, it is, but it also comes down to budget, and I'm not sure if this is left field, but I remember when Trevor Noah did the South African tourism advert, and the first thing I did was go and see if he had posted it on his own social media channel as well. And he hadn't. And I was like, okay, obviously they could only afford him to appear in their content, but they couldn't get him to post it on his own. He did eventually, I think, just because, he's a South African, a proudly South African. But you see, it does come down to sort of budget also.
No, 100%. So Jill, if you were to sort of, just to end off, if you were to give brands one piece of advice around building a sustainable sort of long-term creative strategy for next year, what would that be?
I would say bring the creator more to the table, or to the forefront, or not the creator or the influencer, depending on what it is. I would say try to start your strategy from the influencers being the lead media route, and then supported with traditional, because like you were saying, it is this economy is growing. The attention economy is the most valuable thing right now, and television. You know, like I said, I was at MIP last week, or MIP, and the basic sentiment is television's dead. You know, we're watching on our phones, we're reaching audiences on the toilet, like in their bedroom, all over. So start thinking about how, and no one really wants to see an ad on their phone. So start thinking about how you can bring your brand into the content that people are consuming by partnering with creators and influencers and making that more of the focus of your strategy, less than the traditional. And you, what would your one piece of advice be for brands and agencies going into 2026?
Well, I think it is about identifying, what is right for your brand, whether it is a content creator that suits your brand better, or whether it is a group of influencers. And then I think once you've got your brand strategy bedded down in terms of what it is that you're wanting to achieve, it's identifying if and when and where either those content creators or influencers can amplify certain sections of that brand strategy and or creative plan. And then creating long-term relationships where there is the audiences that resonate with that influencer become aware of the brand over time in a genuine and authentic way. Because I think more and more so now it's the trust economy. People don't trust the media, unfortunately. They don't trust brands necessarily, but they do trust humans. And so there's that part. And then if I was to flip that, I also got to say, like, it is our responsibility as from your side, managing influencers, from our side as agencies, like, we have to do due diligence. It's all well and good saying, is their content pretty? Is it beautifully created? Is it professional? But, when they say their audience is X, Y, and Z, you've got to really interrogate those credentials and make sure that they are doing what they say they are doing with the audiences and, from where they are. So I think there's a lot of due diligence and contractual work that needs to be done up front as well, because clients are trusting you to know best and to guide them around, quite a tricky media component to navigate if they haven't worked in it before, or if they've been burnt in the past. So I think just, to have guardrails from contracts to due diligence to briefs is probably the top three things I would say. And if you get that right, then there's nothing stopping you from having a really positive experience where the brand and the influencer can work together over a long-term relationship.
Absolutely.
And that's the ideal outcome I would hope.
Well, I know that you and I both have worked on countless successful influencer campaigns, that have shot the lights out and have delivered real results. And I think just the one last thing I want to say is I've sat in rooms before where I've been interrogated about the value of influencers from the brand, and like, why should I and why wouldn't I and why whatever. And sometimes influencer marketing is actually not the route for you to go. Sometimes it's, using an influencer for your specific objective and product or service is not the right way, and it's more a radio strategy. So I just wanted to correct myself, going back to saying don't start every strategy with the influencer, but sometimes influencers aren't all, the be all and end all. Sometimes it's not the right strategy.
No, 100%.
We could go on forever.
No, sure. I'm just going to check.
Let's jump
quickly
to a question. We have a question from Miles. Thank you, Miles. And his question is, are influencer budgets or their costs broken down per example? So is it based on their credibility, production, distribution? Jill, maybe this is one you want to take.
No, it isn't. And that's why there's such a disconnect. And like I said, I think the biggest surprise clients and brands always get is when I say what the real rate is going to cost, or the piece of content rate is for a specific influencer. They're going like 35,000 Rand for a tweet, and I get it. I think there's just a lack of understanding of what goes into a piece of content from actually right from the beginning, where you've got an influencer who's now sat in the room and heard your entire brand story and what you want to do with your brand, etc., and they've already started working on it in their head, that's time. And then they go down and they go, okay, you know what, how am I going to communicate this to my audience? Then they put it together a script or a storyboard for you, and that's their time again. And then there's a backwards and forwards of signing off, etc., etc. But then that's before we've even done anything, hired a videographer or a Airbnb or done your face makeup or anything. So I think it would be very, very useful if there was somebody like myself, which I actually do a lot on my Instagram account, is break down what it actually goes in to cost-wise for a influencer to produce a piece of content, so that they understand that it's not a straight media buy.
Sure, Jill, but I'm gonna arm wrestle with you a little bit on this one, because we can't give free rein to influencers, when we've given them a brief and they can just come back and charge, whatever based on the deliverables, whether it's a TikTok or it's Insta or it's it's X or whatever. And I think from our side, what we'll always do is, once that brief goes out to our selected 5 or 10 influencers, we'll give them the brief and say, this is what your deliverables or outputs need to be. Come back to us with a quote on within this budget, what you can do and what you can't do, so that we can then arm wrestle with them and say, okay, well, we might not be able to get everything we would like from you within what you're quoting us, but we'll take the top 3, or we'll take 5 out of the 10 elements that we've originally asked for, because then it becomes like a further decision-making process for the client to have. But to go to every influencer and have them all come back,
Oh, no,
it would
no.
blow the budget each and every single time.
I think what I was trying to say is that I wish people were less shocked when I told them what the price of certain influencers are. And I'm not saying that each should be different. Remember, I said, like, by the time you've done it for as long as I have a general idea of what this one will charge, so for me, it's more about educating the brand to go in with a decent enough budget, and then you say, okay, cool, we want all of this, but influencer X, we have 35,000. How much of it can we get? And it's up to them to come back and say, you know what, the deliverables that you actually want, they cost 50,000, but I can do this, this, and this, and why don't we add 2 stories? You know what I mean? And then I'll throw in that for free, so it is a negotiation. And remember what I said about, as long as the influencer feels love, so as long as you don't go to them with a ridiculous offer, there's a negotiation that always has to happen. I got something the other day for a high-level influencer for 3,000 Rand, and I actually had to go back and say, did you leave off a 0?
Well, that's the job that the agencies do in between the client and the influencer, because we are that buffer that trying to mitigate between the two. Jill, unfortunately, as you've said, we could talk for days, but unfortunately we're out of time. People are trying to finish up their lunches and get back to work. So I just want to say a huge big thank you to you for taking time and sharing all your years of experience and expertise with us. And thank you to everyone that took time out to join us on the call today at the end of a long week. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll try and answer them by emails at a later stage. But again, thank you for joining us, and watch our socials for our next Get Real with Dialogue episode.
Link with us on LinkedIn. Link up with us on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and ask your questions in the DMs. As you can see, I can talk about this for days.
Let's keep the dialogue going. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
have a
Tracy.
fantastic weekend. Thank you, Jill.